So I've been seeing a lot of talk on Twitter about how a lot of DraftKings players don't make their own projections, which is pretty fascinating to me. I would have expected most people to. It's not actually that difficult, as I'm going to show today. I'm going to walk you through how I made my CS:GO and UFC projections, and they've actually had some success. So maybe it's the line of construction I use, but projections are pretty good. So I'm going to start off with CS:GO. So for those who don't know, CS:GO is played on a best of three maps usually, and each map is played to 16. So 30 rounds, whoever gets to 16 first wins. If it's tied 15-15, they go into overtime. The way you can look at this is basically how many rounds do you win more than the opponent. So if you win 16-10, I'm going to call that a +6. If you win 16-13, it's a +3. If it goes to overtime and you win 19-15, that's a +4. So right out the start, I simulate, just put in random jitter for how many round wins you're going to have on a map. This is there to make it so not all my projections are the same. I need to do simulations for my modeling, as I explained before. So I just need a small random number. Usually it's like, one win above normal, or 2 wins, or -3 wins. Pretty small numbers. Then I go to simulate game. Basically, I look at the Vegas odds, how many rounds is a team going to win on a map, and I output that. So the score is how many more rounds does the first team win than the second one. And then also include overtime rounds, because overtime is very critical in CSGO. If you go to overtime, a lot of time you'll go to double overtime, and in that case, you'll have 42 rounds on a map to score points, whereas the other teams will only have 30. It's a huge advantage. You get basically 50% more time to score. Your scores will all be higher generally on your team than everyone else's. So you want overtime. I do the same simulation for map 2, and if necessary, map 3. So if one team won map 1, and the team won map 2, we simulate map 3. I go through every player, find the average score they've historically had, how much of a difference it matters for them when they're winning. So if a player puts up great points in wins, but really bad points in losses, that's incorporated here. Whereas if you're a steady player, you're not an entry fragger. You're the guy who sits in the back and just waits for the map to end. Like, you're not going to score that much differently in a win versus a loss. Whereas the entry fragger, who if he's consistently scoring, their team wins, that's a big difference. So that's the points per game win diff here. Basically, for every round win you get, how many points does your team get more? That's usually under a point, but it can be a lot higher. So then I have all these simulations. We just go through every single player on every team, put a little bit of noise on it just because it's randomized to make sure it's not all the same every time. So your average scores for the player, how many they get, just average points, base number, factor in the wins, and then points per round win. And then you just combine them all together. You take their game 1 score, average scores for your player, so how much does he get on average. You take the score times the number of points they win per round. I do a little bit of dampening on the loss there. I find that you do score more points when you win, but it's not equivalent when you lose. You don't, if you win by 4 rounds, you get a boost that goes up by 4, but you don't get, the other team doesn't lose more points significantly. It's not a two-sided error. So I do dampen the losing. If you won game 1 and game 2, so map 1, map 2, you get a sweep bonus, and you get rounds not played bonus. Add them all together. This incorporates the overtimes. So if you did get overtime rounds, you get a boost. I assume you score at the same rate, and you just get however many rounds. You add them all together. And that is what I did for CSGO, and that is good enough to think a few contests, hammer the top 10 in a few. Really the big key here, I think, is that all the team is correlated or somewhat correlated when they win. Obviously, if you get a kill, your teammate can't get a kill. But if you win, odds are everybody on your team is doing well. And so because everybody gets the same points per win diff, or average game diff, points per win diff, you all go up. We talked about my UFC projections. That's a lot different. UFC, it's usually every fight is independent. So you can just simulate each one separately, and there is no correlation between them. It's a lot simpler to do. So first I get all the prop odds. I get all the outcomes are possible. Khabib wins in round 1. Gaethje wins in round 2. Khabib wins by decision. All different possibilities. I make a map of these, and then I randomly pick one. So outcome.choices, I weight them by the probabilities according to Vegas odds. All the possible outcomes are each fighter wins in round 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or decision win. I don't even consider draws. Those aren't worth considering, and they happen so infrequently you can ignore them. So you get the points for your outcome. So I start with that, win points. That's a function of, first round wins are worth 90, second round are 70, et cetera, et cetera. If you do win early, first round knockout, second round stoppage, I give you a little boost here just because it's hard to simulate knockdowns, but knockdowns are very, very highly correlated with knockouts and early stoppages. So if you win in the first round, generally it's not 90 points. It's a little over 100 because you get that knockdown bonus for 10 points. Or if it's a submission, you got a takedown with an advance. It's another 8 points. It's about 10. So that's where I get this plus 10. For striking points, this is the other big component. I just look at how long did the fight last. So if my simulation said knockout in round 1, it's a pretty simple model I use here. Just take a random number between 0 minutes and 5 minutes, round it off. Actually, you don't even know why I need to round it. That's the fight length. Same thing for 2, 3, 4, 5. That just tells you how long the fight is. You multiply that by their strike rates. So 0.5 points per strike times the strike rate plus a little noise. I always got to put a little jitter in there. Times the fight length. Then I give a little boost here for if you're winning a fight, you're probably landing more strikes. The guy who wins by decision isn't going to be throwing less strikes than his average usually. And the loser is also not going to be throwing more. So I give a little drop off about 20% for if you're losing. For takedowns, I actually don't do 5 points. I give 6 points. The reason is there's no real easy way to model advances, which are 3 points. They're pretty correlated. If you get a takedown, a lot of times you will get an advance, but not necessarily. 5 points for a takedown, 3 for an advance. Let's just call it 6 for every takedown I model. Average takedowns, add in a little jitter, times the fight length, however long I modeled the fight out to be up here. Divide by 12, that's just my average. I looked at the average of a lot of fights, and it's around 12 minutes. Because I only get the statistic for takedowns per fight, not takedowns per 15 minutes, takedowns per round, whatever. I do have to model, average out based on average fight length, which is around 12 minutes. That could be off, but it doesn't really matter. It's close enough. I add everything together. I round it just to make it nice for printing. I 2 decimal points, but it doesn't really matter. And then store all the scores. So that's how I build all my models for UFC and CSGO. Those are the main pieces, and that's making pretty good projections. So I'm actually surprised that a lot of top DraftKings players don't make their own projections. It's pretty simple, but maybe it's just not necessary because other people's projections are so good and readily available that they outperform yours. That's all I got for today. Subscribe to the channel to get updates for when I post a new video, and comment down below what topics you want me to address, and I'll try to make a video about them.